Hello everyone, and welcome back to Spearman Studios. I am your host, Nicholas Jennings, and today, let's talk about life itself. Now, despite its confusingly interesting title, it is not in fact the actual title of Life Itself, the documentary with Roger Ebert, but rather it's a story about interconnectivity. This movie is helmed by the creator of This Is Us, a TV show on ABC Family that I have never really watched. But, again, I have no idea what his writing style is, so I went in kind of not knowing anything. And what I came out with was a movie that pretty much is the worst movie of 2018. Yes, you heard me right. Worse than Slender Man. Worse than Wish Upon. Worse than Truth or Dare. And while those movies I can sit back and I can laugh at because there is some genuinely comedic parts of it, this movie, Life Itself, is a self-indulgent movie that cares nothing for storytelling. So let's talk about what this movie is really about. This movie is about two different families who, at different points in life, have different tragedies that ultimately kind of have this connected message. And while this isn't the first time we've seen something like this is a movie that kinda is not good at all, actually. There's a point at the beginning of the movie where they reference a lot about Pulp Fiction and Quentin Tarantino, and obviously the way this film is structured is kind of like a Quentin Tarantino film, but without any of the whole good dialogue or any of the interesting pieces. It just comes off as an artistic expression that borrows from the expressionism of Quentin Tarantino. The biggest problem with this film is not the half-ass acting. It's not the basic as hell cinematography. It's not even the editing, which at times is really stupid and terrible. It's pretty much the way it's presented. A lot of the dialogue in this movie is what many would consider a California stop or a table dusting. Which, if you don't know what a table dusting is a term from the theater days, like the actual, theater days, where a minor character would come out before, a main character would come out and say, oh yeah, this is the important stuff about this character, and we're telling you all about this guy, even though we haven't really seen much of him in this story, and there's tons of that. It's a lot of exposition, it's a lot of dialogue that we're fed. This movie ultimately culminates into a self-indulgent sort of thesis paper for college. And what this movie really reminds me more of is a book. This movie's a book. If you were to read this movie as a book, it would make more sense. But as a movie, it doesn't. There's a lot of California stops, there's a lot of table dusting, there's too much exposition in this film. And ultimately, when we're giving characters in this film, such as Oscar Isaac's character, or even the Spanish family that we eventually meet in Chapter 3 and 4 of the story, it ultimately doesn't make me feel connected to these characters at all. In fact, it's just all telling of a story of how different people meet. That's not interesting. That's boring. The thing is that when you're wanting to make a movie, right? You don't have all these exposition scenes that tell these backstories. Show us these backstories. The first chapter, in fact, actually is a pretty decent chapter with Oscar Isaac at a therapist. And he's showing us and kind of telling his therapist the story. Not telling us the story, but telling the therapist. And you don't really have this narrator that's overbearing in this film until after the first chapter's done. And might I say that the first chapter does kind of end in a bang, kind of literally and figuratively, but it's a nice first chapter, and I kind of enjoyed it. But afterwards, it just keeps going downhill. The whole movie's main general thesis is that life itself is an unreliable narrator, and it presents this movie as an unreliable narration. But the problem is that there's nothing to back it up. There really isn't. This is a film that would rather preach its overthought, overly done thesis, rather than tell an interesting story. Because at the end of the day, what do we actually know about any of these characters? Oscar Isaac as a character doesn't work because we don't really know much about him other than what we're told. See, there's a term in screenwriting that is called show, don't tell. It is a very basic principle that even the most basic of screenwriters know, right? Even freshmen in film school know this. You have to show, don't tell. And a lot of this film, about 90% of this film, is telling. It's telling you these details. And the story keeps changing different aspects. Some of these changes are good, and a lot of these changes are so stupid. It keeps changing its mind as to what its movie wants to be. There's a certain thing in screenwriting where you have to be sure of your topic. And I understand the intent of this movie. It's supposed to be unreliable. But the thing is that a movie has to be reliable. This isn't The Usual Suspects. This isn't anything like that. Right? This is an art piece that tries to take itself so seriously. But in the end, it's a movie. And you should treat it as such. And again, when you have characters that basically tell their entire life stories in 1 minute scenes, 5 minute scenes actually. There's one 5-minute scene where where one of the characters just blatantly talks about his entire life story, and it just continues to get boring. In the end, life itself is a very boring, self-indulgent, philosophical piece that pretty much anyone who has a brain can figure out that everyone in life is connected like a web. Everyone in life. Your actions to other people may have a sporadic effect towards other people that in the future may come back and loop around. Everyone knows this. Everyone knows this, and it acts like it's some new thing that everyone has not really figured out. And that's my issue with life itself. It's a film that has this message that it thinks it's all-encompassing. But in terms of it, it would rather have worked either as a TV miniseries or even as a book. Because as a movie, it tells way too much of the story. It has way too much exposition. Its characters are one note and one-dimensional. I barely know anything about any of the characters after seeing the film. And this film tries so hard to be so philosophically based that it wants so hard to be this big philosophical movie that people will talk about in years to come, like Donnie Darko or anything like that. But it isn't. It's not a film that I can purely sit down and write a thesis paper about. It's not a film that I can go and sit down and say, you know what, this is a masterpiece of artistic expression. Why not make a 15-page article about it on Gawker? Oh wait, that site's taken down. On Tumblr or something like that. I can't write something like that because this movie basically tells us everything. There's no subtext to the film at all. And what subtext that there is, it basically spells it out to you like you're a dumb audience member. And I find this to be the most offensive movie this year. It insults the audience's attention to detail by basically spelling it out to them because apparently Americans are dumb, apparently, or anyone is dumb that watches this film. Its exposition is way too heavy in this film. The characters are so simplistic that you can cut them with a pin needle, and it's just boring. And that's that's also a big part of this movie, is that it's boring. There's a lot of repetition, it's boring, and at the end of the day, it's bad. Life itself, to me, is one of the worst movies of 2018. And I'm going to give this film a D-. I will give extra points for cinematography. Cinematography-wise, it's good. And editing-wise, there's some nice little edits. But in total, it doesn't amount to much. There's no backing to any of this. Thank you guys so much for watching my review of Life itself. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Do you think I'm a piece of shit for saying that this movie is garbage? I don't know. Just say what you want to say, and have a very nice day. I did not mean that to rhyme, but whatever. Adios.